Today I'm here with Steven Scare, who also goes by Sidewalk Steve. And I am very curious to hear about your adventures, Steve, because for people who don't know who you are, you go around to various public venues and you talk to people about the harms of puberty blockers.
That's mostly true. Where I really got active recently is I'd been buying billboards and just promoting Abigail Shrier's irreversible damage. And one in March, a group of citizens in Derry, New Hampshire, got one of my billboard messages removed over the objection of the really nice people at Circle Sign Works that put it up. And I'd already been going to some venues here and there. So I already had a great big sign promoting the book and some other signs too. So I knew exactly what I was doing. The next morning that I went over in front of this place on Crystal Plaza in Derry where my billboard was. And I decided I'm going to hold this sign up for a couple hours till I need to go to work. And that I'm going to do this until at least the time for that sign contract would have gone anyway. And while I was there, I realized that my free speech was so limited, my ability to express myself, because this message is being censored, that I went around I found a better intersection in Derry, and I've been going around to other places in New Hampshire, just looking for spots like what would be the perfect spot if I put up a billboard. And ideally, I've got a place where people can pull over to, or there's a sidewalk there and people can talk to me. And I've done a couple of public events too, and I plan to do more.
Wow. So I don't think I realized that your billboard had been taken down. That's been sort of a ongoing difficulty that advocates like us have had, is trying to get billboards in the first place and then having them removed once they're up, which is shocking.
And just this week, I'd had billboards running in Fort Wayne. That's where my mom and dad live, and that's where my brother works, and he lives with his family. So I found a great partner with Dan Walcott and Eagle Sign Works, and we put up just a couple of signs. I'm not trying to deliberately get anyone angry, but just promoting irreversible damage there. And this week, it looks like someone with paint guns came over and completely covered that message. So I'm working with him to see if we can put up another message about who did this to the sign and why, in the book that these groomers don't want you to read. So yeah, that's something that's a big problem, is not being able to put up billboards. And if I could just keep doing that and raising money for that, I wouldn't be spending hours and hours hanging out on the street with my own signs, I don't think. But after, of course, getting all the, either it's shadow banning or it's outright blocking on social media, not being able to get the messages out there, and this message being ignored, of course, by the legacy media, and just the ability of not being able to speak about this in public schools and university is so limited, I took it to the streets. That's all that's left for us.
Can you explain what that's like? I've been to one public venue with a billboard, or with a sandwich sign that said stop trans eugenics, and on the other side it said children can't consent. And it was a fairly small event, and mostly people just like walked around me, pointed at me, shook their fists at me maybe. I think I had 2 people come up and ask me about the sign. So what has your experience been?
Well, it's a big difference whether I'm coming out for a morning or an afternoon on the side of the road, or if I go to an actual venue. Over a year ago, maybe it's almost 2 years ago now, I was just so concerned about this because, as you know, we lost our niece to transgenderism. That she's someone that had been talking about suicide, and she died of a drug overdose shortly thereafter.
Can you give a little background on that story if you're comfortable?
Yeah, this is something that she was. This was, I guess, about 3 or 4 years ago. She got into it. She was a minor. She was 17 years old. She was severely ADHD. She was always up to something and into something, and she was brilliant. She could pick up any instrument and play it. But she was also in a situation where my brother-in-law still has a brain tumor. He's got a lot of difficulties, and then he was in a new relationship, and then her mother had some issues of her own, so she was getting bounced around quite a bit. And transgenderism was all of a sudden she got interested in this. What this seems like the solution to all of my problems, and someone who isn't treated with a whole lot of respect. All of a sudden, she's Rosa Parks. She's reading the Parade, the testosterone. She saw she was a little flea, and all of a sudden you've got muscles, and it's very exciting. But it didn't never addressed any of the underlying issues. So she went through a series of drug addiction and homelessness, sleeping under bridges, and she ended up moving back to, I don't even remember now which home she was living in when she died. And of course, her mom, who wasn't involved a whole lot in her teenage years, this was something that she could approve of and be excited about too. But
So this
it
really
ended
goes
up.
against the narrative that if you don't allow children to transition, they'll kill themselves, because in this case, your niece went through the medical interventions and had
You'll never
really
get
poor
these.
outcomes.
You'll never get these statistics from the CDC, as far as I know, and no one else is following through on what actually happens. But it's also a never-ending argument that if you didn't, if you have a niece or a nephew who tried this and then despaired it didn't work out, it's because you didn't buy into trans ideology enough. And that's what when I've talked about this, say at the State House, the powerful lobby, the members from GLAAD or whatever powerful rainbow group is there, say, well, if people commit suicide or if they're dissatisfied, it's because their families weren't accepting enough. Well, I lived in New Hampshire. She lived in Indiana. We once in a while we would exchange a few words, and they were still friendly. And my wife and my daughter, one of my daughters, went out to visit briefly. So no, I just wasn't involved in it. I never expressed an opinion on her in particular. That's something that I just wouldn't do, is criticize a kid in a particular case, least of all my niece. But yeah, so in a way it goes towards the narrative that it's because you were such a hater. And I've learned in a lot of conversations, don't bring that up, because these people, like any cult, the people that support this stuff, they're completely brainwashed, and they have an answer for everything. And that caused me a whole lot of problems and really got me more involved, because after her death, I just posted on something on Facebook that's just like what I told you about. So then I made the mistake of, I'd forgotten to block my niece on Facebook after that. So all of her friends ended up reading it. And then I got more or less doxxed by the Indianapolis lobby. And at the time I was working as a special education teacher, and something that I got a notice from the central office for my school district saying, we need you to meet with the superintendent and the director of personnel. You can bring a union rep, and they don't tell me what it is.
Wow.
Well, what they were telling me is that they had me investigated for transphobia because of what the people in Indianapolis had done. And after that, on the job, my job changed. It was entirely different. My director of special ed had been the school psychologist, and the APA, as you know, the American Psychological Associations, they really are the big pushers of transgenderism. And so I became a big part of my life after years of perfect reviews. And by then I'd been in around 25 years. All of a sudden I'm getting these notes about, next week we need to meet you with the superintendent and bring a union rep. And it was all about really, really petty things, that they were going to make it clear that my life there was going to be miserable. So I left. With COVID, gave me a chance to leave my job as a special ed teacher, and I love the work, but my odds of getting a work at a public special ed, a public special ed job now are about nil.
Wow. So you're one of those who really have taken a hit on a number of levels, but you're still standing up and fighting back. And I am really appreciative of that, because I think too many professionals are afraid that they'll, that they will have those repercussions. And so they're bullied into silence. And that's why this ideology is taking hold so strongly.
It is. It is. And they will. The rainbow lobby is thorough, and it has ears everywhere, and they will shut everything up, just like my innocent sign in Fort Wayne, Indiana, getting painted over. This message may not be out, and they will stop it by any means necessary. In any case, circling back to your question, which is what it's like to be out there, it depends on the event. Shortly after my niece's death, I just wanted to get the message out, and I went to a pride event in Manchester, New Hampshire, not just a few miles away, and I stood outside of their area, or their areas, and I was stupid enough. Well, in the mix of this, I had one sign stolen, and my wife and I were mobbed by people and pushed around. And on the way back, I thought everyone was gone, but they're closely aligned with the Antifa, the Pride movement, when you go to these things. And so we got encircled and blocked by the Antifa on the way back from that. And they made a lot of threatening remarks. Like, guys threatened to spray me with bear mace. So in those are situations that I'm a lot more careful about putting myself in. So if I go to an event, first of all, I always make sure that I've got my police cam on, and that it's prominent and displayed. And that just wearing that makes a big difference. And when I pick out places where I'm going to be, I'm looking for places that aren't in a dark alley. I'm looking for well-lit places where I'll probably see a police presence if I'm roadside. And if you go for a big intersection, say with a stoplight where people can read my signs, then they're gonna see that. I mean, then the police are gonna probably be going by there a whole lot anyway. A lot of traffic, visibility from all sides, visibility from the other cars coming by. So that's pretty good. And if I'm doing that, mostly I'm getting just crazy enthusiasm. Right now, I'm in where I spent my summers in the Poconos. So all these people are from New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. And I stopped by yesterday at an intersection for just half an hour to do my thing and hold up my signs. And people were so excited to see me because you can say that, he's saying that, and honking and smiling and waving. Wow. And then I get the people, and it's almost always say college educated young women or high school girls that look like they're going to be the valedictorians, well dressed, great hair, and they're saying, give me the finger and saying F you, and I say no thank you and have a nice day.
So what does your sign say?
It depends. And right now I'm going to go plug for, if you go to well, it'll be on, if you go to Twitter and you go to Sidewalk Steve, I've just started another fundraiser to get some more signs, but the signs that I've inherited is one, I just got the book cover for Abigail Shrier's Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. And I have another one with a few more words that say, read this book. And at the bottom it says, one of the best books of the year by the Economist, to just show that, hey, this is a really good book. And Abigail Shrier isn't some right-wing nut job trying to bring you into a radical religion. Right. So I have that. And then I just have no puberty blockers is another sign. And the one that I probably use most is gender clinics harm children.
Those all seem really innocuous, and especially the Abigail Schreier book cover. The fact that your billboards with that have her cover on there are being vandalized to such an extent, it really just shows that they're afraid of anybody getting the counter message out there, because I think it's because they know that if people start questioning, it's so obvious how harmful these things are.
I had the misfortune of being at Indiana University. I studied sociology, and I was a really, at least when I started out, I was really excited. And then, of course, it ended up just turning, even then, in the 1980s, into just plain old political ideology. But one of the things I was really excited was Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. And that's something that's really powerful in this. And he had a theory that from studying history, that the crazier the idea, the more people, the more vehemently people will believe it if there's a couple other factors to it. And one of them is you've got to be surrounded by other people that really believe in this idea too. So you're not isolated when you see this movement, when you don't see this movement denied. And you'll actually go out and proselytize, spread the word more in the face of contradictory information, and people will get even crazier and doubling down and just grasping at any information that proves their theory right. And he studied a group of nice people that believed, first of all, there was going to be a flood that they could predict at a certain date. And then some flying saucers, literally flying saucers, were going to come down and deliver them. Well, they became some sociology professor Festinger and some students infiltrated the group just to figure out, do study, take notes, see what was going to happen. And even as they became the laughing stock, because they were in the national news and people were visiting them just to make fun of them or to say, wow, we're really the aliens, they doubled down and believed it more. And that's what you see with this. This view is so fragile. I mean, you can dismiss this in one or two questions, of course, about, okay, if someone's transgender, they identify with another gender, you need to tell me what that gender is that they're identifying with. Otherwise, none of this makes any sense at all. And then, of course, now their new line is, well, now you're playing semantics. With people's
Yeah, well, and that's the
feelings
thing,
and
is you're
emotions.
dismissed as hateful, or you're playing semantics, or you're focused on genitals. Those seem to be the sort of the fallback position, which is ironic because I don't think that we are focusing on genitals.
But they don't care. They aren't thinking. It's not the rationality. What's going on, and it becomes almost an animal instinct, is I need to shut down dissent because my views are so fragile and they're so dangerous. Because something else regarding cognitive dissonance is, the more you're invested in it, then the more likely you're going to hang on to it. Regarding the people waiting for flying saucers, there was a professor of engineering who ended up losing his job because of this. Not so much because he had the weird beliefs, because he wasn't showing up for work as much as he should have been, because he was pursuing this. And people that were maybe estranged for their families. Now look at this. If you're complicit in the transing of children, you irreversibly harm children, you sterilize them. Girls aren't going to grow back breasts. But no matter what they tell you about puberty blockers being reversible, no one's ever explained to me how an 18-year-old boy with a penis the size of a 5-year-old is suddenly going to develop a full-size penis when you stop puberty blockers. It's not reversible. It's not true. Now, these are the things that, if you're a parent especially, whether even you probably acted in good faith, then you just did something horrible to your kids. Or even if you're one of the friends or relatives that said, oh, isn't this wonderful? He's finding or she's finding her authentic self, and you're cheering it on. Well, then you aren't a very nice person if you face up to that. So they're not going to face up to that. And that's when you talk about the people you encounter. There's one archetype of it's like a different version of the same guy who's somewhere between his late 40s, I'd say, and 60 who will just, he thinks he's devastatingly witty and insightful and intimidating. And he'll come up when I'm standing on the street and saying, do you mind if I ask you just one question? And it's clear he's not going to ask me just one question. That'll give me the suicide story. And he doesn't want to hear the answer. If I answer, he'll just start mocking me anyway. But that's another place where the video camera comes in, as I've learned, and I'm still learning, if people come in there and they're just asking rhetorical questions, or they're just mocking you, get their answers. And that's really made for some good Twitter feed. One, I managed to meet a psychologist who's a psychologist at Dartmouth Hitchcock Clinic in Manchester, New Hampshire, where they're doing these horrible surgeries. And she came on and said, I'm an expert, and I know that what you're saying isn't true. And I said, well, it's a big decision to start for a teenage girl to start going through these medical changes, isn't it? And she said, really, it's not. I said, it's not. Well, yeah, because puberty blockers are completely reversible, and even the cross-sex hormones, they're reversible too. And I said, she's the one who's counseling people going in.
Wow.
And it was something that else just keeps coming up with this is the people don't understand the logical fallacy of appeal to authority. It's always the 9 out of 10 pediatricians and doctors, and of course the psychologists, the APA, they recommend this and they think it's good. So you get a whole lot of that. And you get, I get a lot of them. I'm in public too. People have been trained to, and this goes back before transgenderism was hot, but it was something the entire lobby used really effectively, is comparing what's going on to the discrimination against Black people, especially in the South. So when people see me standing by myself with my sign, to them, it puts them in a position where they're in Selma and they're fighting the dogs and the fire hose, all by giving me the finger or telling me off, but without any of the courage or the consequences, and knowing that they're entirely safe, that they're with mainstream media, Hollywood, the Netflix and Hulu, and public schools.
Yeah, I find it also just so insulting. I believe it was Cory Booker made the comparison, and it just blew me away that anybody would compare what's happening to children to the civil rights movement. I mean, there's no comparison. We have doctors who are actively harming children, and teachers who are lying to children, and authority figures betraying the trust of children and essentially grooming children, versus people trying to gain basic civil rights. I mean, there's no comparison there yet. Somehow they've been able to conflate it in a way that even someone like Cory Booker is suggesting that they're the same kind of fight.
Because first of all, the lobby is so powerful, and the lobby pretty much owns not only the Democratic Party, but a pretty big hunk of the Republican Party now too. And among the Republicans, Chris Sununu, governor of New Hampshire, signed laws that the conversion therapy ban, which makes it a crime for therapists to tell a girl that she might actually be a girl, and that it might be a good idea to hold off on any sort of surgeries or medical treatments. That's a crime under the conversion therapy ban. And of course, the gender identity laws that force us to pretend that a girl is a boy. She says so. By law, we have to go along with these. But we can't be surprised by any of the tactics that they use. If their main tactic that was so efficient was telling moms and dads that, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son? This cruel choice that they're giving them, this false dichotomy.
Yeah, I can't imagine being a parent who's presented with these choices by someone who seems like an authority, like a doctor or a psychologist. I'm just curious what it's like for you interacting with these activists, because I've tried really hard. I'm not particularly good at engaging in dialogue. I get so heartbroken, I think, that, the one I went to the Capitol, I guess it was probably about 6 months ago, and there was a protest, and I decided I was just going to go and film stuff. And within, 10 seconds, the activists hit the phone out of my hand, and I was just like, these are bullies. And I tried engaging, and he just kept yelling at me, "You're killing children, you're killing children." I mean, right in my face. And I thought, I don't believe I can make a difference doing this, and I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. So how do you navigate dealing with basically religious zealots, is what they seem like to me. Ideological zealots at the very least, cult members.
Mhm. Well, regarding them, and I'm learning more and more, like the archetypical guy that shows up and starts at me with that question about, may I ask you one question? I just I let him go. I keep on asking him just a few pointed questions and see if I can get them talking. I'm not going to change if people are deep into the cult. I'm not going to change their minds.
Mhm.
But what I want to do is just stay calm, be sympathetic, because that's the stuff that's going to get the view on the Twitter feeds.
Mm.
I
So it's kind of
on my
sharing
Twitter.
the insights into their thought process and belief system, and
If you go to
hopefully being able to sway those who haven't been captured by the cult.
Sure, I want to get them talking and getting them what they're thinking, and I also use that I write for an online media that I've got available to me that has a really big circulation, and it's the Granite Grok. So, for example, when I talked to the psychologist who worked for the gender clinic, and she went after me, and after she went after me, she actually posted an Instagram of her talking to me and about how she scorched the ground under me with her brilliance. And all she said, she didn't bring up any fact or any study or anything like that. But I was able to go back to my police cam, which is a lot harder to slap out of your hand, by the way, than a phone, and a lot more dependable. And there I was able to cut, and I was able to edit some video that I put on about what she was saying. And then I also wrote a couple of articles. One is she had overheard me talking about the statistics with autism, and 3 to 6 times as likely to identify as trans. It's just awful. And she talked about, yeah, it's true. And essentially, we trans them anyway. So I managed to get a whole article with quoting her, citing the Dartmouth Hitchcock saying that. So
Wow.
my point was, I wasn't going to change her mind, but she was giving me great information that I could write about later. And writing is a big part of what I do too. I've got to remember, when I get good video, to set aside time to edit the videos and to write and to put that on. But if I go into a situation where I know I'm going to encounter hostile people, as I said before, what I want to do is I prefer to have someone else along who's filming what's happening and filming what's happening to me. And what I'm doing is I'm going to get video of their reaction to show how that love perhaps is not love, and this isn't all that loving and compassionate. And in those situations too, I just keep in mind that it's quite possible that I'm going to get hurt. I'm willing to get hurt.
Yeah.
When I started speaking out, I realized I'm sacrificing. I'm not going to get another job in special ed in public schools.
Yeah.
Then I just remember that my niece is dead, and other people are getting pulled into this, and I could see kids. I was a high school special ed teacher, and I could see other kids getting pulled into it. So if something bad happens to me, I really don't. I'm at a stage in life where everything's been fine. If you speak out against this stuff to the level you speak out, you're going to get pushed back, and you will be punished, even if it's just by, say, your family members isolating you. And I get that back as a big reason that someone will say, when I've got a sign up, people will often say, my niece got pulled into this. So, because it's almost always girls at that stage. And she never showed any symptoms of this. So you obviously got rapid onset gender dysphoria. And they'll say, but I'm going along with this. Or even some people saying it's their own daughters. And they're so afraid of being isolated from their daughters that they're more or less blackmailed, and they're going along with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, you might be in situations, and we probably both know people that aren't going along with it. And yeah, so their young adult daughters aren't who are pretending to be men aren't talking to them.
So what do you think it is about you? Because there aren't very many people like you who are willing to sacrifice. And that's been one of my biggest frustrations. And I think those of us who are out there publicly are just incredibly frustrated at how few people are willing to push back against this. They are so afraid. What do you think is sort of about you that allows you to fight back? Because you're making a difference. And maybe if you could like pinpoint that, it might inspire other people to stand up.
Well, I think for me, it's like a quality of a defect, which is a lot of people have a wonderful theory of mind. They understand what other people are thinking, and they're really good at telling you what you think you need to hear to make you feel good. And maybe going along with, they're saying all babies and brides are beautiful. When someone shows me a picture of a baby and the baby looks kind of like an alien with a pointy head or something, I have a hard time doing that. I tend to say, and
Oh,
it's a real flaw, whatever is on my mind. And in public schools, for example, that made things bumpy for me, because I
yeah.
would see people whenever I saw a program that was going on in my school district that I thought was hurting kids, or kids that things that were really done for the convenience of the school district. I would tell them, and that would really get me a whole lot of ire. That's my personality. I don't want to go along with anything that's not true. So that's something that's doing it. And also, some of these things are my just being so stubborn and not being able to shut up. That as soon as I was brought into my school district office for something that had absolutely nothing to do with the schools, and then they told me they had me investigated. Why did they have me investigated? No complaints from inside the school, but they did it anyway. Well, that just gets me upset, and part of my just part of the anger comes in, that I don't want to live a lie. I don't ever want to live a lie,
Yeah.
even in a small way.
Well,
So
and I
so then
keep
I
thinking that if
I push
they're
back.
willing to investigate you for your private stance on something, we're getting to the point where if you can't stand up for this, you might lose your chance to stand up for anything in the very near future. Um, if we continue along this trajectory, this ideology wants to control everything you think and believe and do and feel. And that's part of why I speak out, is that I keep thinking, if this isn't enough to motivate people to stand up and fight back, then what is? And by the time it is, you might not have that choice anymore.
Well, if the state can try to compel you to pretend that your daughter is your son, as has happened in Canada, as you know, where a father was actually jailed for refusing to pretend his daughter was his son, then yeah, all your other freedoms are meaningless. And in New Hampshire, I've got a lot of friends that are big on the Second Amendment. All right, good on them. And I realize some of the people that I'm working with, like, for example, I'm also working with the radical feminists to teach people remind people what a woman is. And they wouldn't agree with me on that. But my point with my Second Amendment friends is, what the hell are you defending anymore? If someone can separate you from your daughter, if all of a sudden she pretends you're a son, the gun isn't doing you much good anyway. The First Amendment, and just being able to fight for reality.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like Stephen's having technical difficulties, and so we're going to have to end this a little bit early. But I encourage people to go to his Twitter Twitter feed and look at some of the videos he talked about and support his efforts to put up more billboards and just really appreciate his incredible dedication to fighting this very harmful ideology.